מסכת Bava Metzia, page 40, we'll start on page 39b, 16 lines from the bottom of the page. Dealing with monetary disputation, unfortunately, sometimes involved with issue of violation, meaning one party threatening the other party, intimidate the other party, and it forces us, meaning the Bet Din, to take side or to be involved. We're going to speak about real cases that involve in this type of situations and how should we react. Also, we're going to discuss the profit or the profit margin when it's come to a businesses involved with liquids such as oil, wine and things like that. What's the proper measurement of interest or income? We'll speak about measurement in general and much more. Here are examples. Fish, meat, those products, if it's a product that import from overseas, many times it's injected different materials, but even if it's just basic materials such as water, in many researches they show us that something that was imported from Netherlands versus something that import from Thailand or other places around China and more, the level of net meat or net fish is much smaller than prescribed. The question is how far one allowed to do that. Another example of that is if you go to a city, and I saw it in other places, you been served in the restaurant and then they present to you a check, a bill for the meal. And if you're not careful, sometimes they squeeze in the taxes, the tip, and then they put tip. Is that okay by halakha or not? So let's start. 39b, 16 lines from the bottom. Mari bar Itzak. Mari bar Itzak is named in that ancient time in Babylon. It was a, how do you say, the bully. Someone who was a very big muscle guy, used to intimidate people with his, how do you call it, mafia, or whatever, the group of people, and people are afraid of him. He inherited a estate from his late father. All of a sudden, a brother whom he didn't see for many, many years, from faraway location called Bei Chozai, came and introduced him as partner, meaning he came to Mari bar Isak and he said, I'm entitled to a half. Mari bar Isak atale acha mi bei Chozai. Now, the problem is, Mari bar Isak ignored him. He said that he's lying, I never have a brother, I don't know what he's talking about. And Amar lei plogli, that brother from Bei Choza'ah, which is far, said that I'm entitled to half of the Yerusha, half of the inheritance. Amar lei Mari responded to his brother and said, Lo yada alach, I don't know who you are. Atal kamed Rab Chizda. So Rab Chizda was the head of the rabbinic court at that time. So the brother came in and he said that he is lying, I'm his brother, and he refused to split with me. Amar lei, Rab Chizda said, Shapir ka'amar lach. Marry on the first place, answer properly, meaning prove that he is wrong. Shene'emar, the Torah said in the well-known story of Joseph and his brothers, they said in Bereshit 42, Vayaker Yosef et Echav, vehem lo hikiru. Joseph departed from his brother for so many years, 22 years. He was a kid, he was 17 years old. When they see him again, it was after he was in jail and after he became viceroy king and more. So now, all of a sudden, is a situation that Joseph recognized his brothers, but they do not. מלמד שיצא בלא חתימת זקן, הוא בא בחתימת זקן. Joseph left his brother without a beard. He was 17 years old, and therefore his brothers did not recognize him. But now he's the viceroy king of Egypt. It's 22 years passed by, so now he looks different. So there is a concept in halacha, המוציא מחברו עליו הראיה. If the burden of proof, it's upon the claimant. אמר לי, Rab Chizda said to that brother, זיל הייתי סהדי דאחורת. Go and bring witnesses that you are truthful, that you are the brother of Mari bar Isaac. אמר לי, איכתא סהדי ודחה לי מיני, דגברא אלימה הוא. He says, I have witnesses, but they scare for Mari because he is a very violent and a very dangerous physical character, and they don't want to be hurt, and therefore they're scared to come to court and give a testimony. Amar le lididei. So Rab Chizda turned to Mari and he said, Zil ant aytei sehedei lavachuchu. Okay, Mari, it's your turn. You now have the burden to bring witnesses that he is not your brothers. So many rabbis ask a question, what type of business is this? According to Rashi, it's the same witnesses that goes in testimony the other way around. Tosfot said, can't impose upon the defender to bring witnesses. But apparently over there was different at that time. The Rivash was asked once, was a fellow that left this world without family, and therefore people in the community who carries the same last name, they get some of the Yerusha, the inheritance, and then other people came with the same last name, and they claim, based on the witness, that they are the relatives. So again, it's not as simple as sounds when it's come to this type of issue of inheritance. Amar lei, Mari said to Rab Chizda in response, Dina hachi hamutzi mechavero alav haraya. Since I'm the one who carries the Yerusha, he is the claimant, he is the one who needs to bring witnesses. Amar lei hachi dainin alach ulechol alime dechavrach. Rab Chizda was strong, and he says, because you are violent, and because you're threatening people, and because people are intimidated by your mightiness, by your threat, and enough is enough, we don't want that to be in the community, and therefore, because of people like that, we have to change the ruling. Amar le, sof sof atu sada velo mesada. But how about if he brings the witnesses and they don't tell us the truth? And they said, they can come and they lie and they said that he's not my brother, and then I will not be able to get the estate. Amar le, Rab Chizda said to him, you know what, Tarti lo abdi. They said that they will not perform two wrongs. They will not refrain from telling the truth and also testify falsely. Obviously, you can comment that it was in those days. The whole idea of witnesses that come and give a testimony not at the front of the other party, it's not uncommon. Was a case, Rabbeinu Asher, the Rosh in Tshuva Kafchet, discussed it. Was a husband that claimed his wife was not loyal to him, and he brought 3 people. And you see similar cases in the modern days, that husband came and said that the wife is betrayed him, and she was a very high in the Israeli police, very high level, and she threatened them that if they give a testimony, she's going to arrest them. So you see responsa Tshuva Kavchet in the Rosh, Rabbeinu Asher, responsa number 28. You see the same in Netivot, book called Netivot HaMishpat, Siman Tetvav, chapter 15. The both said that if you're threatening and you refuse to bring witnesses, so therefore, if you don't bring it in a peaceful way, it means that you admitted of doing wrong. And that's, by the way, the halacha. Again, Netivot HaMishpat ruled that in Siman Tetvav. You see it in the Rosh, Tshuva Kavchet, that if someone come and threaten and do things like that, and the witnesses cannot come and testimony in peace, it's a proof to us, the Bet Din, that the guy is admitted wrong. It's unfortunate that it happens sometimes in business that people come and say something and give a testimony to the Bet Din, and the testimony is not, they're under oath, but they're scared. It was a case that Rav Breish discussed. It was an employee that needs to give a testimony in the funerals that he have a negi'ah, that he have the interest to keep his job, so he wants to be nice to the owner. And the same, you see Tshuva from the late Rav Sheinberg asks the same question. Reuven asked Shimon to give a testimony against Levi. So Shimon said, wait a second, you have an issue with Levi over $1,000 that he owes you. I'm doing business with him for every month for tens of thousands of dollars. So can we as Bet Din impose upon Shimon to do that? And the pasuk im lo yagid v'nasa avono, if that applicable. It's a well-known story about the Rav of Petach Tikva, the nephew of the Chazon Ish. Story goes that it was a husband and wife. They came before him, before the Bet Din, and he said, "I'll never betroth her. She's not my wife." She brought a ketubah. It said clearly that he betrothed her. So he looked at the ketubah, and it was the name of the Meseder Kiddushin, the Rav, and the witnesses. So he called them up, and they came, and they said, "We don't know them. We think that maybe it's fake ketubah. We don't know this man. We don't know anything." And several hours later, all of a sudden they came back and they said that this man is very horribly violent and he already damaged relatives and friends of us, and we have no choice because we're afraid that he can do harm to us. So they come and we give a testimony in the Bet Din. The question is, do we say, Keivan she'eid eno chozer u'me'id, since someone is giving testimony, cannot come back and give another testimony that disputed the previous one? We discussed this matter based on our sugya. So anyway, the end of that story, Lesof atu sadeh de'achui. It turns out that the witnesses came in and they testified that the fellow from Bei Chozai is really the brother of Mari by Isaac. Amar Lei, the brother said to Rav Chizda, Liflog lidnami mipareseu v'stoneh deshatav. Okay, so since we're now going to split half and half, that's not enough. He planted all these trees and all these things in the field, I want half from that as well. Rav Chizda said to Mari, Shapir Kamma, your brother have a right claim. Dit 9. On Bava Batra, page 143, they said if one died and left adult and minor sons, Gdolim Vektanim, and the adult sons enhance the property. They enhance the property and the profit goes to the middle. והשביחו גדולים את הנכסים, השביחו לאמצע, which means you need to divide it between the adult sons and the minor sons equally. Page 40, וכן אמר רבא, השביחו לאמצע. In the same way, Rabbah said, they enhance the property and profit goes in the middle. Rashi challenged that, there's a Ramban, Rashba. Anyway, Abaye disagree, אמר לאביי, מידה מהדם גדולים גבי קטנים בידי, וכמחלי הכה, מי ידד ללכם? Over there we know that that's oldest and the minor son, so they let go. Here, when Mari bar Isaac planted those trees, he was not aware that he had a brother. Therefore, what exactly you mean to say, but said it could go for gold payment for the labor. So the Gemara said, Agalgal milta umta lekameh Rabbi Ami. So this matter continued to develop, that ruling of Rabbi Chizda, and it came before the Rabbi Ami. Amar lehu gdola mizu. Even more, amru shamin lahem ke'aris. So he does as the sharecropper. Hashta didei, here when Mari enhanced the estate with the mindset that it's his, loya vinale. So you don't give him portion as the enhancement of the estate. So that's the way Rashi explained. In Hebrew you call it ta'anat hagana. Come and nenakes charo ke'aris. Come and reduce his portion as a sharecropper. Adrua halekameh Rav Chizda. The disciples bring back this question to Rav Chizda. Amar lo midame. He says you can't compare the situation of nichsei shavui, of someone who gets to captivity, to our. It's totally different. Hatam birshut nachit. Over there, the Beit Din appointed someone with the consent to go and in charge of the estate of someone who's in captivity. Versus, and therefore, the Beit Din enact the idea that he will act as a sharecropper. Hacha, in our case, lam bereshut nachit. Mari went there without the consent of the Beit Din. So therefore, he cannot get a portion. Ve'od, and furthermore, katanu, that brother was a minor at that time. Ve'en moridim karov nichsei katan. We learned several times that the rabbinic code does not authorize a relative to descend and manage the property of a minor. That's the way Rashi explained. There is others, the Ravid and others, that challenge that. But anyway, Adrua lekameh Rabbi Ami. So they brought back that to respond to from Rabbi Chizda to Rabbi Ami. Amar lo lo saimu akamei dekatanu. And that's very unfortunate. It happens many times with the rabbinic quote. People do not complete conveying all the details of the case. So here, I wasn't aware that his brother was a minor. Because if I knew it, obviously I'll rule differently, and that's the way Ramban said. It's a book called Beit Shlomo. You have a discussion. It was a painful case of heir. It was 2 sons and a daughter. The father had several cases that he was unfaithful, and the question is if that the Bechor, the first son, is the real first son or not. It's like Muchzak Bechor, and it's not clear. So even the father admitted that he was seen. The question is if you have Chazkat Bechora, En Adam Mesim Atzmo Rasha, the whole pasuk that said Yakir. Anyway, the Talmid Chaver of Reb Chaim Nivolozhin, who wrote a book called Mishkenot Yaakov, he dealt with a case that was a father that left several sons, and he has a big business, and one of the sons turned sick, and the other brothers spent some of the business money for all the medical expenses for that brother. But then it was a disputation among the brothers, so they brought for mediation. It was a very painful case, how to divide it equally, because one of the brothers claimed that I never agreed to take from the general part of the business and participate with all the huge medical expenses of the other brothers. And he asked, Mishkenot Yaakov asked the question, do we treat it like the case of Mari Bar Isaac, or the last part that you divided in the middle, if that's applied to this case or not? Now the Mishnah הקדושה, המפקיד פירות אצל חברו הרי זה יוציא לו חסרונות, לחיתים ולאורז 9 חצאי קבים לכור, לשעורים ולדוחן 9 קבים לכור, לחוסמים ולזרע פשתן 3 שאים לכור, הכל לפי מידע והכל לפי הזמן. The reality is, especially in those days, it was a constant issue of pest control, meaning mice was all over, and therefore produce all of a sudden lose its capacity. Can be other reasons. So here you have the first case, a fellow deposits produce with another, obviously to have it a garden. So they said, הרי זה יוציא לו חסרונות, meaning the one who come and pick up his produce, the guardian needs to return obviously what's there, let's say for example grain, but he can subtract, he can reduce the things that cause to reduce. The important part here that the situation is that the shomer, the guardian, combines some of his own thing with the other fellow. So therefore, one who deposits produce with the others, that guardian deducts from the produce that he returned an amount equal to the standard decrease of the produce. Now, how you calculated the amount? So they give here measurement, obviously it's the Talmudic measurement, but they said for wheat and for rice, he deduced 9.5 kab per core, which is 180 kab. For barley and millet, he deducts 9 per core. For spelt and flaxseed, he deducts a 3 se'ah, which total 18 kab per core. So the whole calculation is according to the measure, and the entire calculation according to the time elapsed. Now, it's important to know that the way we explain it is based on Rashi. There are other way of understanding the way they are doing it, but the key is to remember, as Rabbi Moshe Weisblum and Mishnah explained, and you see it also in פירוש המשניות and the Rambam and others, they said that the climate, the agriculture applies to the time which was written and the location that was written. So at that time, it's the Mishnaic time in Eretz Israel. Now, the Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri disagree. אמר רבי יוחנן בן נורי בחימר, אכפת להם לעכברים. Says, what do the mice care? How much produce the guardian is safeguard? So Tosfot here have something very fascinating to tell us. He said, "B'ta'amayu derabanan mefarish ba'Yerushalmi." The reasoning of our sages is in Yerushalmi. Hanei achba'erei reshi'enim. Those mice are evil. Kad tamyan ibu lo mistayim de'achli. When they see food, it's not sufficient for them to eat. And guess what they are doing? Ela karyam lechavreihon de'achlei mahon. They also call all their friends, the other fellow mice, to come and share the big meal. I assume many of you know the story of the late Rabbi Moshe Weisblum. You go around the Jewish world, you see his pictures everywhere. I was not long ago in Poland. I saw it in Ukraine and in different places in Jewish communities, restaurants and other places. They put that picture. This is a tradition that Rabbi Moshe, the great pious, righteous Kabbalist rabbi, past generation in Europe. His name is Rabbi Yeshaya, and he lived in a city called Kastir, Rabbi Yeshaya ben Rabbi Moshe. So they said that it's hard to understand at the high level of spirituality, he was able to eliminate the mice, and they believe that by placing his photo, it's avoiding that. But anyway, also we talk about Hasidim. There's a story about the Rebbe of Shinava. Shinava is the name of a city in Poland, Eastern Europe. So some Hasidim, some followers come and ask about egozim. The issue with Nad, it's those days they see the mice, carry them, and put them in their place of the hole that they are. So then you can go there and pick up whatever the mice took. Question is, can you eat it? So Shinava Rebbe said we should not feel rachmanut on the mice. But anyway, the fascinating part, it was supposed to use the word reshi'ei, that they are kind of evil. Anyway, so they said those mice, they eat regardless. וכי אכפת להם לעכברים ועל האוכלות בין להרבה בין נקימה, אלא יוצאים לו חסרונות לקור אחד בלבד. Only deducts the amount equal to the standard decrease of just one core of produce. Third view, Rabbi Yehuda disagreed here with the third opinion. He said, אם הייתה מידה מרובה, אינו מוציא לו חסרונות מפני שמותירות. Said if the deposit was a large measure, which is 10 korim, so he said it does not deduct the decrease from it due to the fact that the difference reason is increase. So he returned the measure of produce that was deposited with him because the increase offsets the decrease. Mishnah tells us that when we have a rice less than the value of 9.5 kavim, so orez tuvia chaser. So after you decrease, rice is lacking a greater amount than it's recorded in the Mishnah. Here we talk about a share rice. So it said, לחוסמינו לזרע פשטן 3 שיאים לקור. אמר רבי יוחנן, אמר רבי חייא, זרע פשטן בגבעולים שנו. Why? Because it's dry out in the field. The wind caused them to go all over. So that's the reason it's with regard to flaxes on the stalks that they said that the rate of decrease, it's great. So So Tanya Namneache, we learn a similar another Vaita. לחוסמין ולזה רפישתן בגיבולים ולאורז שהם כלוף 3 שאים לקור. So you see here, for spell and for flaxseed, on the stalks and the anshel rice, he deducts 3 se'ah per core, and the Ritva explain that's the way they used to do that. Tosfot here commented, he says that when it's come to rice, it's not a chidush, but when it's a pishtam kaluf, when it's a that flax that was taken, that's different, meaning each one have his own way of measurement. It's a interesting point to spot. Anyway, they said, הכל לפי המידה תנא וכן לכל קור וקור, תנא וכן לכל קור וקור וכן לכל שנה ושנה. אמר רבי יוחנן בן נורי, תניא אמרו לרבי יוחנן, הרבה עובדות מהם, הרבה מתפזרות מהם. Much of the produce is lost, much of the produce is scattered. במה דברים אמורים? תניא, במה דברים אמורים? שערבן עם פירותיו. Here we have a situation that the guardian is safeguarding with his own produce, so now he's unable to distinguish between them. In general, the Meir and the Ritva comment that he should not do it. We learned it in the past several days. Adam רוצה בקו שלו, a person wants his own. And that's the Bachin where they are 292 said. But here, either the Ritva argued that we may get a special permission from him, or the other that he did it without permission later. It's not a variation what exactly transpired. אבל ייחד לו, או קרן זווית, אומר לו, but if he designated a particular corner for him, so he can say this is used before you and it does not calculate the decrease. And again, there is argued that he needs to take a oath that he didn't do anything behind his back. וכי רבן עם פירותיו מאי הרי, לך זה לכמה אביין. So if you mix it, you can check, you can measure. So they said, בנסתפק מהם. Here, the guardian took supplies from the produce, and therefore it is impossible to ascertain the rate of decrease. ולך זה כמה הסתפק. Let him see. So said, דלא ידע, ודלא ידעי, יעבץ, said, כמה הסתפק. It's not sure. He does not know how much he took supplies. That's the reason he need to calculate it. The Shach said that you measure the tvuah, you measure the grain, then you calculate how much the mice ate, and you reduce it. So the Shach, based on that teshuva, based on questions someone asked, I'm just using modern day terms, Reuven deposited by Shimon the value of $1,000 of grain. Shimon had another $1,000 value of grain that was mixed. The question is, do you have the rule of המוציא מחברו עליו הראיה? That's the Shach. The discussion with that, based on this sugya. Rabbi Yehuda אומר, אם הייתה כמה מידה מרובה, how much is allowed measure? אמר רבא בר חנא, אמר רבי יוחנן, 10 קוראים. תניא מאחי כמה מרובה, 10 קוראים, 10 קור. תניא טען כמה רב נחמן, רבי יוחנן אמרו שמדד לו מתוך גרונו והחזיר לו מתוך גרונו. That he measured from his threshing floor and he returned from the threshing floor. אבל מדד לו מתוך גרונו והחזיר לו מתוך ביתו. If you measure from the threshing place and you return from his produced to him measured for his own house, which were more precise than those used in the threshing floor, he's not deduct the decrease of returning the product, because this product the owner deposited was measured with the increased measure of the threshing floor, that offsets the decrease. אמר לי, וכי בשופטני עסקינן, we talk about to full, דהווה בחליה רבה ושקל בחליה זוטה, they use a large measure, take produce and turn to a small measure. דילמה מותן גורם כמה, maybe a season of threshing floor. מה מדברים רואים שמדע לו במות הגורם והחזיר לו במות הגורם, אבל מדע לו במות הגורם והחזיר לו במות הגשני? Again, the question is, what's the season? If we measure in the season of the threshing floor, which means total different measurement, and you return it the time of the rainy season, אבל מדע לו לימוד הגורם והחזיר לו במות הגשני ולא יוציא לו חיסרון, מפני שמותירות, because they expanded, so that he ultimately returns the same measure. אמר לה רחוב לאביי, אם כן, livka kada, if the volume of the grain expands during the rainy season, so the jug, whereas the grain place, should burst due to the expansion. Mara said it was a story. It was an incident that the jug burst. He said it's because the volume contracted due to the compression, which means that when the produce was deposited, it was loose and had a greater volume. When the guardian returned, the produce was tightly packed in the jug, resulting in lesser volume. And from here we have a lot of derivative for halacha. First, we see how much we need to be careful, we need to be circumspect when it's come to this. In those days, the jug, the kadim, was not chazakim, was not strong. And Shulchan Aruch, based on that, have a discussion. What exactly the measurement, how you take the measurement. By the way, we talk about Shulchan Aruch, there is a tremendous amount of write-up in halachot. What do you do with measurement of food as far as the bracha achorona or berkat hamazon? For example, you have a puff-up cake, ugam mitnapachat. So the question is, what do you do? What is the kezayit when it's come to brachot? Next Mishnah, yotzilo shtut liyayin. When the guardian returns liquids that were deposited with him, he deducts 1/6 of the amount for wine to offset the decrease in the volume due to the absorption into the cask and evaporation. And that's the reality. Yotzilo shtut liyayin, Rabbi Yehuda omer chomesh. Rabbi Yehuda says he deducts 1/5. The Gemara later on said it's not a disputation between the two. The Rashash wrote here and other places, the question is, Kamma nivla bashmarim, how much it was basically gets in the, because the Rishonim, the early sages disputed. Question is, when it's come to wine, you have the issue of wine that its absorption of the cup deeper more than the oil, and also the shmarim of the wine carries more value. You can make a different produce. You make a liquor, you can make a whiskey, you can make a lot of things, especially if you use a jug for a past wine. And also sometimes they combined it. It's the whole idea of tam mikdam, mikabel tam. Now the question is, it's a very serious question halacha when someone uses a previous used jug, if it's a issue of yain nesech or not. Anyway, now we're going to the oil. יוציא לו 3 לוגים שמן למאה. How? לא גומך קצת שמרים, לא גומך קצת בלה. So you take a log and a half for sediment that sinks to the bottom of the cask, and log and a half for absorption of into the car. So that's further historians said that how exactly you measure it. אם היה שמן זוקק, יוציא לו שמרים, לא קנקנים ישנים, אין לא יוציא לו בלה. So the question is in halacha, they ask how you treated the measurement, let's say, is 3%, how long it takes to be absorbed. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, he will talk about the soil, the oil. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, the same way that we said the guardian reduce 1.5 log for sediment, אף המוכר שמן מזוקק לחברו כל ימות השנה. Even in the case of one who sells refined oil to another all day of the year, הרי זה מקבל עליו לא גומך שמרים למאה. The buyer accepts upon himself that the seller will deduct a log and a half of sediment for 100 log, as that is the standard measure for sediment. The Moshe functions Zatzal have several teshuvot based on this Mishnah. When you have the issue of basar v'chalav, what do you do when you have a large part of meat and you have a little milk, and the person pull out 3/4 of the liter? What exactly the echad v'shishi? Try to say that that's applied specifically in something that is gush, kasher, something that stick together, a big one, not something that is lach, wet. Anyway, now the Gemara expand on the difference between the view of Tana Kamma and Rabbi Yehuda when it's come to the deduction of the wine. V'lo pligei, the Tana and Rabbi Yehuda did not dispute it. When it's come to this halacha, ki atre u'marti atre. Each one has his own location. Batra v'mar chafu b'kira. One, the Tana Kamma, they used to have a sha'ava. They coat the casks with wax and does not absorb much. לא מייץ תפי. והקדמה חבו בחופה ומייץ תפי. In place of the Rabbi Yehuda, they coat the casks with pitch and absorb much. Basically, you can measure also the level of the hits here. Ibaitema mishum gargishta. We wish you could say it's because of the quality of the earth from which they make the casks. Barrel must from this earth absorb much, and barrel made from that earth do not absorb much. Ha maitzat fei, ha lo maitzat fei. Usually the oil, as we said, it's observed much different than the wine. The sediment, etc. in wine is different observed. The Rabbi Moshe Weisblum asked when it's come to Argalat Kelim based on this sugya, what exactly the shi'ur hachom, what exactly the level of the heat. Trying to say in those days they use measurement over there, which is Yerushalayim and Bnei Brak. They try to say that Bnei Brak in general it's much warmer city than Yerushalayim, so therefore the level of the heat in a Argalat Kelim should be different. Better Rabbi Yehuda Ramo 40 בטמן מקוזת בדנה. In Rabbi Yehuda's place, they will place a contents of 48 pitches of oil into a barrel, as that was the standard size of barrel there. Azal dana v'shitei suzei pares Rabbi shita shita bezuda. The barrel went for 6 dinars, and Rabbi divided the oil and sold it as 6 pitchs for 1 dinar. So that's the way Rashi said. Rabbi Moshe said that Vav Tfichim Mezuz Lamed Vav Tfichim. So Rabbi Moshe in the right bed, the different one, we go just by Rashi. As we see, if you go by the Shtam Kubetzet, in the right bed explained that Rabbi himself was not the storekeeper, rather he instructed the storekeeper to sell oil in that way. Page 40b, just a little comment before we go. The last Rashi, the last line, פריס לרב יהודה שידה שידה בזוזה נעשה רב יהודה חנווני והיה מוכן 6 כוזה בזוז. זאת אומרת, meaning Rabbi Yehuda himself was a store seller, and he sold it as a like retail. But anyway, so now the Gemara calculated and analyzed how much Rabbi Yehuda gained out of each barrel. Dal shalatim v'shita b'shita. You take 36 kuzin, pashule treisal, which means you have 12 kuzin benefit. Dal tmana shtutei, so you subtract 8 pitches full, which is 1/6 of the total amount, as that is the measure absorbed in the barrel. Pashulu alba, so you left, pitch full remain 4. That's the profit of Rabbi Yehuda. That's a well-known thing, you see it in a lot of places in Halacha, that when it's come to a profit of something that really Chayei Nefesh relate to one's existence, so it should not profit more than 1/6. See it in many times in Halachot. So why more? Ikar gulfei ushmaraya. Here is different because they are barrel and they have the sediment, the shmarim. So Aruch HaShulchan brings a halachic discussion based on this sugya. If you have a competition and you see that sometimes it causes the price to go down, so people approach in the community and said that they should have a rabbinic enactment, a takana, not to go too much down. So Rav Wozner have a teshuva on the hagdara, on the definition. Nowadays people are in a cutting throat competition in those stores, and sometimes one fellow open extra hours in the evening, another competitor open another 2 hours, and then it's never ended. If it's proper or not to make a takanat tzibur, to make an enactment in a community, how much you can go in that, go down the price or opening the store and more. Rav Wozner have a teshuva. Anyway, Yachin officially tfei mishtut, which means Rabbi Yehuda crossed the prohibition of shtut. So it said ikatarche. You have to take in account the arduous effort that involved with this, because the exertion as you sold the oil, and there is a payment for tapping as the craftsman needed to install the tap in the barrel with made balzaniata. So all of that included in the calculation, and if you go by those numbers, you go to just 1/6. So you should know that there's a general machloket, you see it, we discuss it in several places in Halacha, if you go milegav or you go milebar, meaning what exactly the definition of 1/6 of the shtut? If is that applied to the investment, the hashka'a, or kesef שהרוויח, the money that the fellow gained out of that. If 1/6, if shishit mima שהשקיע, if the 1/6 based on the investment, or shishit if you put everything all together. The Mishnah Kedosha said, אם היה שמן מזוקק, if it was clean refined oil, אינו יוציא לו שמרים. So it does not deduct any of the oil for sediment. והאי אפשר דלא בלע. It's impossible that the cast did not absorb any oil, even if it was saturated. אמר רב נחמן, במזופפים שנו. רב נחמן says that in the cast coated with pitch, that Tanai is taught in the Mishnah, if all cast is old and coated with the pitch, it does not absorb anything. The Maram Shif, in Tosfot you see too, that try to argue that there has to be new one because the old ones were already absorbed, or there's another notion. Tosfot also speaks that you have to differentiate between, over there they talk about wine, here talk about oil. So even the case that the cast coated with the pitch, one they are saturated, and is no more oil is absorbed. So it's a machloket between the Taz and his father-in-law, the Bach. It's in Yoredea Tzadik Gimel, Yoredea 93. So the Taz have a notion, unlike his father-in-law, the Bach, that he said that it's always, you have a reduction of the wine. You should know that with those barrels, if the barrels are not totally brand new, most of the mefarshim, you see it in the Taz in particular, that it's absorbed something there, that the argument is that they dissolve, they take out the wine that was getting there earlier, which means that if you argue that way, so there's no deduction of the wine. Anyway, you can see more in Yoredea 93. רבי יהודה אומר, אף המוכר שמן מזוקק לחברו כל ימות השנה, הרי זה מקבל עליו לא גומר שמרים למאה. רבי איך שתמצא לומר דברי רבי יהודה, מותר לערב שמרים, עם דרחמים אסור לערב שמרים. So as we said that the shmarim, the sediment, it takes time to go down to be shokea, to go down. So the key is that here the machloket is that Abaye hold that when you analyze, you will find that according to Rav Yehuda, it's permitted to mix sediments that is settled at the bottom of the barrel with the clear oil and sell the mixture, and according to Chachamim, the sages prohibited to mix sediment with the clear oil. And Achlat Moshe said that if he did it before those sediments get to the bottom, that's not an issue. But anyway, דברי רבי יהודה מותר לערב שמרים והיינו תמא דמקבל. He said at least, לא גומחצת 100, אמר לי, היא באה לערוב ולך, מי לא ערב ולך? השתנמי קביל. ולמה לי הרב כלי? So we assume, as Rashi said and others, that this one take this oil in order to make money. Hava mezdavan li, hashtama yaved li, lechud lo mizdavan li. So Tosfot here argue, if it takes a small amount each and every time, so the claim here, it says lechud lo mizdaben li. The sediment cannot be sold on its own, and I'll basically will take a loss in that case. So they said, they talk about the owner, that the homeowner, not a merchant, so he need oil for his own, and filter oil is preferred for him because he used the oil to facilitate the removal of the sediment. By considering the fact that you not mix the sediment with the oil, so you see indication that you renounce your right to me. Rabbi Yehuda letamei the late mechila. So here we juxtapose Rabbi Yehuda that he said that when it's come to interaction, people not let go. Here is a well-known Mishnah in Batra 77. The Mishnah said, "Machar lo et hatzemed, lo machar lo et habakar, machar lo et habakar, lo machar lo et hatzemed." Usually, when a fellow sells an animal, so he sold the yoke and he did not sell the cattle, which means tzemed, it's the yoke that holds the animal together while plowing. So you have the two animals held together by the yoke. If one sold the cattle to another, he did not sell the yoke to him. The sale is limited to the literal meaning of what he said. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, hadamim modi'in. So the money tells us the scope of the sale. Keitzad, amar lo, if the buyer said to the seller, sell it 200 zuz. It's clear that you don't sell the tzemed, the yoke, for 200 dinars. So it means that that's the intent is to take both ox. Ein hadamim raya. The sage says the money is not approved because it's possible that one of the parties renounced part of the sale price. Nowadays, it's a common question. People order on a phone, and many times it's a very serious halachic question when people get orders of things that they didn't really ask for, or in other matter of chashash or na'ah, maybe people are paying for things that didn't order. דברי חכמים אסור לערב שמרים בעלותם עד לא מקבל, דאמר לי, היא באה לערובי, מיד ושרק לך, השתנה ולא מקבלנה. So I'm not taking that as you reduce the oil from that sediment. אמר לי, רב פאפה לבעיה אדרבה, היא פחה מסתברא. דברי חכמים מותר לערב שמרים בעלותם עד לא מקבל, דאמר לי, מדלו הרב לי, יכלו להחליט לי. Which means that you gave up your right to provide sediment as part of the oil. דברי עבודה אסור לערב שמרים בעלותם מקבל, דאמר לי, היא באה לערוב ולשאר אל ערבו, ולך קבול לא מקבל, זבון זביב תגר העיקרי. So the spot explain that you become like a merchant. You buy and sell and buy and sell, and that's basically all the gain of selling that oil is basically, Rashi said, it's by the sediment. It's a common discussion in halacha when one purchased. Let's say in those days they bought fish. So is that correct and fair to include the intestine, even everyone knows that they're not going to use? Or you buy a radish, so in some places they sell you the leaves and other things. So the seller said, I bought it like that, why should I take a loss? The buyer said, you know, it's like you go to a restaurant, the same argument. You go to places and they squeeze in all kind of things, tip, tax, and then they put a space and said if you want to give a tip. It's all kind of ilchot hana'ah that can be derivative from this discussion. It's a story about the Vilna Gaon. Once it was a chalban, fellow that those days used to sell milk. I remember, this is back at the 60s, that it was a car that, you know, ring the bell and people stand in line with the glass of milk, empty glass of milk, and he used to push and filled up those milk. So it was a fellow that came before Yom Kippur to the Vilna Gaon, and he said, Rebbe, you know, I committed the sin, I combined water with the milk. So the Vilna Gaon said to him, you know what, now you commit yourself, from now on, you just sell the pure milk. A week later, he come back and says, I lost my business. He says, no one wants to buy from me. The way that the milk now, it's a pure milk tastes. So the Vilna Gaon said, you know, it shows the downhill of the generation. It says that the same people that most probably are not truthful with each other when it's come to business, it affects them that they also get produce that it's not the pure produce. It's like what goes around comes around. Is that correct? It's like bigger question in the business in general. You have people who are selling honey, and it's actually a sugar and the water, and they claim that it's honey. Anyway, Tana, אחד הלוקח ואחד מפקיד לפקטים. Learned in the Batra, the legal status of both, one who buys and one who deposits oil, when it's come to residue, which is olive pits floating on the oil, is the same. So the question is, the question between the Rambam and Meiri, what exactly the floating oil? מה לפקטים? היא למהר כאחד הלוקח לא מקבל פקטים, מפקיד למה לא מקבל פקטים? ולמה פקתח מה יבד לו? אלא כי אחד המפקיד מקבל פקטים, לוקח למה מקבל פקטים? The big argument is that the residue, each party get it. Tanya, it said, Yomi מקבל לוקח פקטים. Is that true that the buyer accepts upon himself the reduction of the residue? אולי מן הברייתא, רבי יהודה והתניא רבי יהודה אומר, לא אמרו שמן החור אלא מוכר בלבד. He said, שהלוקח מקבל לא מכסה 80 בלא פקטים. The whole idea of the statement of the sages that the loss of the marky oil is only for the seller, as the buyer accepts upon himself the deduction for a log and a half of sediment without residue. So they said, Lokashya had the Yayv Lezuza Betishra, Bekashaka Benisan, Kimida the Tishra, had the Yayv Lezuza Benisan, Bekashaka Benisan, Kimida the Nisan. So they just want to add the two words. It's a question that comes up a lot. You see sometimes produce that come from different countries, and they injected a lot of water, such as frozen meat, frozen fish. There's a huge difference between fish that come from countries like Thailand and those countries. You see it in a lot of reports. I saw the other days in the Times, amazing reports how they injected so many things, and especially water in a certain way so they can maintain for long. And the question is, by halakha, how much you can charge, because the weight, obviously it's not the pure weight of fish or milk, and it's a discussion among the poskim how far you can go with this.